I am from a small town in Virginia, which has a famous abandoned insane asylum. The building overlooks my town and was originally built as a school in the 1890s. However, it was closed down in 1911 due to some homicides. In 1916, it was reopened as an experimental psychiatric facility, but there were many problems with overcrowding and neglect. Finally, the hospital was shut down in 2003. Even if the story behind the building doesn't scare you, let me warn you about my own experience and advise you to stay away. A few months ago, the building's owners advertised a public paranormal investigation event. Being interested in the paranormal, I bought 2 tickets for my boyfriend and myself. I had just started my YouTube channel and thought it would be a perfect first video. Unfortunately, that video never made it to my channel. A few weeks later, I stood outside the abandoned building, filled with awe at its broken yet beautiful state. I've always seen abandoned buildings as a mix of beauty and destruction. As we were escorted inside the main area, the atmosphere shifted abruptly. I felt a sense of dread and an extra 100 pounds on my shoulders. The air was so thick that it felt suffocating. Despite feeling uneasy, I took a deep breath and followed the group up the stairway into the patient corridors. The tour guide began telling a story about a 10-year-old boy who became a patient at the hospital in the 1940s, but unfortunately died a few weeks later. As soon as the guide finished with, "And then he died," the door beside me swung open violently and slammed into the wall, causing drywall pieces to fall. I flung myself back towards my boyfriend. My heart raced, but I decided to continue the tour regardless. Unfortunately, there was little interaction with spirits. However, the real horror began when my boyfriend and I separated from the group and made our way down to the basement for the investigation portion of the night. I had heard that the basement was one of the most active spots in the building, so I wanted to set up the camera there to capture something. My boyfriend and the other few people were a few feet ahead of me, chatting amongst themselves, while I followed at a slow pace. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be down there after the uneasiness I felt upstairs. Suddenly, I felt a tug on the back of my shirt and heard a harsh whisper calling my name, "Jenny." I was too scared to turn and see what was behind me, so I broke free from its grasp and ran to join the rest of the group in the corridor. After some time passed, my boyfriend and I decided to set up our camera in the morgue, which was also in the basement. We tried to communicate with the spirits by signaling with flashlights. "Is anyone here?" I asked, pointing towards the flashlight I had propped up on a chair. "If so, make this light turn off immediately." The flashlight began to frantically flash on and off, and I felt the same tug on the back of my shirt, and the harsh whisper calling my name repeated over and over. I tried to break free from the force behind me, but this time, I couldn't move. I let out a blood-curdling scream, and my boyfriend dashed out of the door to seek help, but it felt as if someone had lit a fire on my back, and I was burning up. I couldn't bear the agony anymore, and an overpowering desire to turn around engulfed me. I spun around to face the source of my pain and met the blazing maple-colored eyes of a towering, shadowy figure. I stopped screaming and felt my body go numb. I gazed at the shadow figure while it contorted its face with a wicked grin. I felt a pull towards it, and time seemed to slow down. My boyfriend and a security guard arrived in what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it had only been a couple of minutes. The force holding me vanished into thin air, and I snapped out of my daze. My boyfriend collected all the equipment and pulled me upstairs by my wrist. It wasn't until we made it to the parking lot that I broke down into tears. That was the most petrifying encounter I had ever had. As I look back on that night, I want to believe that it was just a breakdown caused by stress. However, my boyfriend and I both know that it was much more than that. Despite this, I find myself struggling to resist the allure of the building. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and there will be more frightening tales to come. Be sure to send me your stories at darkstories.org, whether they involve sea monsters, other maritime tales, or lockdown experiences unrelated to current events. If you want to support the show, please check the links in the description. And until next time, here are the credits for my all-time patrons. Stay safe out there and keep the creepiness alive, because this world is full of mysteries. Everyone had varying beliefs when it came to the paranormal, but I had always been intrigued by it. It was almost like a hobby to me. However, after what I experienced, my perspective on the unexplained changed forever. This event occurred a few years back when one of my friends got into a severe car accident. My friends and I went to the hospital to see him, but he was still undergoing surgery. As we waited for any news in the waiting room, I grew restless and decided to head to the cafeteria to get some coffee. It was the wee hours of the morning, and as I walked down the mostly deserted halls, I heard footsteps approaching me from behind. I turned, thinking it might be a nurse or one of my friends coming to join me, but no one was there. The corridor was silent except for the usual sounds like machines or the faint, distant chatter of workers. Something felt strange, but I tried to ignore it as I wasn't a fan of hospitals. As I turned to continue walking, I suddenly felt a wave of unease wash over me, causing me to freeze in place. Have you ever experienced that tingling sensation when you sense someone is standing behind you? Your skin breaks out in goosebumps, and you turn around, anticipating to see someone. I had that same feeling, but once again, the hallway was deserted. The sensation persisted, and I felt every hair on my body standing up. The air around me became frigid to the point where I could see my breath. The noises of machines and chatting that were once present disappeared, as if a switch had been flipped, and everything became muffled. I was frozen with fear, not knowing what was happening or what to do. Despite my urge to run, my legs refused to move. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. It was as if something had taken control of me completely. For what seemed like hours, I was held captive by this unseen icy force. Suddenly, I felt a rush of coldness pass through me, as if something had gone right through me. And then, just like that, it was gone. I stood there in shock, attempting to process what had occurred. Did you feel it too? Out of nowhere, I heard a voice and looked over to see an elderly woman in a hospital gown walking past me towards her room. Confused, I asked her what she meant, and she looked back, smiling at me. It comes whenever someone dies around here. Don't worry, it won't hurt you, she said, almost amused by my shock. Uncertain of what she meant, I asked, what comes? The woman gave me another smile, saying, the Reaper, honey. After our exchange, I hurried away at record speed, nearly tripping over my own feet until I reached the waiting room. I chose not to share my experience with my friends, as I knew they would have dismissed it as me being tired. However, I couldn't shake off the feeling that what I encountered was not natural. Sadly, not long after the incident, we received the devastating news that our friend had passed away. His brain injury was too severe. We went home in complete silence, and the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. The feeling I had that day was inexplicable, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had truly encountered the Reaper. And I can't help but wonder, was it there for my friend? When my mother was 23, she was in the hospital after a terrible motorcycle accident that left her with broken legs and a severe head injury. It was late at night, and she woke up from a restless sleep, but something inside her urged her to keep her eyes closed. Growing up in a spiritual family in Vietnam, my mother took the subject seriously. Finally, when she opened her eyes, she heard a murmur, as if someone was trying to communicate with her. The room was filled with pale people, all trying to get a glimpse of her in her hospital bed. However, as soon as she looked at them, they all quickly averted their gaze to their feet. She was so startled that she tried to calm down and make sense of what was happening. The murmuring grew louder and louder, until it seemed like the entire room was filled with dozens of people whispering to each other, but she couldn't see anyone moving their lips. When my mother was 23, she was in a terrible motorcycle accident and ended up in the hospital with 2 broken legs and a serious head injury. Late one night, she woke up from a restless sleep and felt a strange urge to keep her eyes closed. Eventually, she opened them and was shocked to see the room filled with pale people, all looking at her. When they noticed that she had seen them, they all looked down at their feet. As they murmured quietly to each other, my mother began to panic and scream, until a nurse came in and calmed her down. The nurse dismissed it as a hallucination caused by my mother's concussion, and my mother eventually went back to sleep. She didn't experience anything else until she moved to Korea and became pregnant with me. One day, as she was taking the bus, she saw a pale figure among the people getting on. The figure seemed familiar, and my mother began to cry when she realized that it was one of the pale people from the hospital. The figure floated down the middle of the bus, with its feet flat against nothing beneath them. An elderly woman came to comfort her, and when my mom looked back where the person had been, they were gone. From that day until we moved to America, she had no further issues. Eventually, she became pregnant with my brother and began seeing these pale people everywhere, in stores, on the streets, and even outside our home. It was a challenging pregnancy, and she ended up going to the hospital several times with minor complications. Whenever she was left alone in the hospitals, she would scream and cry. She said that the pale people were everywhere, and that the only way she felt safe was if someone was with her. The night after she gave birth to my brother, we were all sleeping in the same room because she had been quite shaken by the delivery. Dad says she almost died, but I don't know how much of that is true. She woke up in the middle of the night with my brother next to her, and once again, her bed was surrounded by those people. As my mother watched, one of the pale figures placed their hand on my baby brother's forehead. At first, my mother was terrified, but she noticed that my brother was pale and not breathing. Instead of calling for help, she watched as the pale figure stroked his hair repeatedly until he began to turn pink and finally took a breath. The next morning, when the nurse came in to check on my brother, the pale figures were gone, and my father and I were still sleeping. The nurse examined my brother and declared him healthy. My mother realized that the pale figures weren't there to harm her or her family. They were lost souls or something similar. She believes that one of them helped save her son's life that night. However, maybe it was all just dreams or hallucinations, but my mother tells the story with such sincerity that I can't help but believe her. Nowadays, she only sees them occasionally, usually during times of great stress, but she is no longer afraid of them. Despite this, I still worry that they may not be entirely benevolent. I fear that the pale figure who held her hand on my brother's forehead may not have been saving him but taking him. I have heard stories of spirits taking over living bodies to return to the real world. I hope my mother is right about them. Thanks for watching. If you're a horror lover, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a spine-tingling story. Don't forget to leave a comment down below with your favorite horror story or idea for future videos.